The big news, which is the reason why we're having Grant Cameron on today, not that he's, not an excellent guest to have at any time, because his knowledge is so incredibly vast, and he researches the minute details about all of this stuff that he looks into. And we were both extremely excited. I know I was excited when I ran across this interview. Some of you who have been in this field for some time probably are already aware of the rumors that Spielberg showed his movie E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial at the White House. And when he did, the rumor was that Reagan had leaned over and whispered to him, there probably aren't 6 people in this room that know how real this movie really is. That was the rumor that went around, and it was unconfirmed. Nobody knew for sure if that really happened. In fact, I was skeptical because we hadn't heard much. And then there was Grant Cameron had gotten a story from someone who said they talked to a major director, didn't want to give up who, and that this major director confirmed that Spielberg had told him that actually happened. And no offense if you're in media or production, I don't trust media and production people that much, and I think probably my listeners can understand that because, of course, a lot of times when you do interviews or you help documentaries and stuff and you put them together, producers want to put out a show that's going to sell. The truth they kind of mangle and twist, and unfortunately, most of the time, if you work with a big television show or something like that, they're not going to present your information the way you want it to. They're going to mangle it. And the big magazines will do that. The worst, I'll tell you guys right now, that I've worked with is probably Popular Mechanics. They're awful. The San Francisco Chronicle is pretty bad, too. Anyway, so I don't trust media and stuff that much, so I wasn't sure if it was real. Well, this week, a guy from Ain't It Cool, his name is Eric Vespi. Ain't It Cool News. I don't know if you've seen this site. Probably not, because it's not that big of a news site. But apparently this guy has interviewed entertainers before quite a bit, and he kind of tricked Spielberg. He tricked him into giving him an interview about Super 8. But instead of talking Super 8, he talked about his favorite Spielberg movie, which is Jaws. So they talk about Jaws and the details about Jaws, and it's a very fun interview. It's all written out at Ain't It Cool News, but also each of the sections have an audio link where you can actually listen to him and Spielberg talking. Obviously, Spielberg's having a good time. He's sharing some behind the scenes about Jaws, and it's going great. They're having fun. He's real loose and open. And at the end of this very long interview, the guy says, "Hey, I heard that you showed E.T. at the White House, and Reagan said that E.T. was real." And Spielberg goes to and answers the question. He said, "Oh, yeah, that did happen." He said, Reagan stood up, looked around the room, kind of taking a head count, and with a straight face says, "Thank you for bringing the movie to the White House and showing it to us. We really liked it. And there are a number of people in this room who know that everything on the screen is absolutely true," unquote. Spielberg goes on to say that he said this without smiling, but everybody laughed anyway. They all started laughing, assuming he was joking. So Spielberg then assumed he was joking. Spielberg admits, he says, "I am somewhat of a ufologist, so I was hoping that there was something more to this than just a joke." So that's kind of cool, too. He admits he's still into UFOs because he's kind of hesitant, Spielberg, to say this sort of thing. And that he was really excited to hear Reagan talk about, this and hoping that this was a real deal. But so the question is, was Reagan joking? Was Reagan not joking? That is the question. Of course, the guy following this story the closest over the years has been Grant Cameron, so I had to talk to him about it. I knew he'd be really excited about this news because we've talked about it over the years, and Grant would have a lot more information to share because there's a lot of background behind the president and UFOs and Spielberg being friends with these presidents, all of that sort of thing. So I wanted to get Grant on to talk about all of this because he's the perfect guy to talk to, and I knew I would have a lot of fun. I always do talking to him, and it would be very insightful. So let's go ahead and hear what Grant has to say about the big Spielberg news. Spielberg and UFOs with Grant Cameron.
All right, I am so happy to have my good buddy and the expert when it comes to the president and UFOs, Mr. Grant Cameron. Hello there.
Hi, Alejandro. Thanks for having me on.
Yep, it's good to talk to you again. It's been a while since we had you on, and I know I am really giddy about all kinds of Spielberg news that I've come across lately, but I'm sure you are too, because we've even talked recently about, I'm always, I don't know, I've become kind of jaded, I guess, but I've been skeptical, until you can have confirmation of whether, Reagan really said anything or what he said at the ET screening, and now we have confirmation from Spielberg's own mouth.
Yes, we do, and you're the one that actually tracked it down and let me know, and then we together sort of scrambled up some stuff, and it's a story that goes back. I was actually, during the morning, I was trying to find this, and I've got the earliest version of this comes from Bill Moore, who was one of the more prominent researchers of the 1980s, and the first appearance I've got of this story that supposedly Reagan said something at the screening of ET in June 1982 comes from Focus magazine, which was Bill Moore's magazine of November the 1st, 1987. And I'll just read the one paragraph that has the original story, because if you go on the internet, there's all sorts of different versions of the story. This is Bill Moore's version. In June 1982, following a private White House screening of Spielberg's then-to-be soon-released film E.T., the president quietly commented to Mr. Spielberg himself, there aren't 6 people in this room who know how true that really is. Unfortunately, a press of people coming forward to congratulate him prevented Spielberg from pursuing the point further. The source of this information is none other than Mr. Spielberg himself, who told the story to our associate, Jamie Chandere, shortly after it happened. Now, apparently Chandere was working with a Japanese film crew in Japan on a documentary on Spielberg, and that's when he heard this story from Spielberg. And
so Chandere heard it straight from Spielberg? Straight
from Spielberg.
Okay, I wasn't sure about that.
And Chandere, as your guests probably don't know, but Chandere, Bill Moore quit and went into seclusion. I tried to get a comment from him after you had this story break, and apparently he's not talking about UFOs. He won't even talk to people who he used to talk to UFOs about. Jamie Chandere got remarried and is totally out of UFOs since the late 1990s, so there's no way to really confirm this. But I was thinking Jamie Chandere was inside the business. It doesn't make any sense that Jamie Chandere would make up the story, because if you're inside the business in Hollywood, I mean, the worst thing you can do is make up a story about a major director and then make it public. So I always had confidence in the fact that Jamie Chandere is telling the truth. And as I told you later, I was contacted by a film producer at the X conference, and she came up and said that she had contact with a major Hollywood director. She would tell me who it was, and she said, well, he had told the same story. And I said, well, is it the same story? And she said, well, I'll check. She took my webpage. She took the story off the webpage, went to this, and she said it was a major Hollywood director, and came back and wrote me back about a month later and said, yes, he confirms that's what Spielberg told him as well. So then the story that breaks the other day is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And in this one, he basically is talking to the audience, which is about 37 people somewhere in that neighborhood. And in that thing, he just talks about the fact that there are people in the room who know that this is all the truth. And he says it without a wink in his eye and without any smirk or smile. Everybody in the audience laughs, and Spielberg interprets this now as being a joke. And what I was thinking about is there may still actually be 2 contacts. because I can't see Chandray making up this story. And what may have happened is Spielberg told Chandray, I bet you there aren't 6 people who know how true this is, and then stands up after and tells people this open story. Because I tried to track him down shortly after. In 1988, I tried to track Spielberg for a comment, and I wasn't able to get through to him. And Billy Cox, the reporter from Florida, managed to get a hold of his PR guy. And the PR, Martin Levy, I think his name was, he said to Billy Cox, he said, Mr. Spielberg will not comment on private conversations that he's had with the president, which would mean that there may have been 2. The private one where he said about 6 people, and then the public ones. So Spielberg still is not breaking his confidentiality with the president if he's telling this story, because this was an open story that the president told in front of 40 people about the fact that this all could be for real. And the other thing is, and you got this material from the Reagan Library with the names of the people. And if you take a look at the names of the people who were in the room, there really are no need to know people. It's always this whole thing about UFOs.
Well, there might
does
be
the president
one.
know? Pardon me?
What do you think about James on the list? Yeah, thanks to you, we were able to get this list of everybody who was in the room. But one was interesting, James Beggs, who was the 6th administrator of NASA.
Yeah, who was the NASA guy at the time. The strange thing about that was the morning after, this happened Sunday night, the filming, and right after the movie, Reagan went to bed. He got up the next morning, and the first meeting on his agenda the next morning was a meeting on the space program, on policy for the space program, and there was a briefing, and maybe it was NASA people were briefing, but there was no people on the list of in the room, and this was held in the Situation Room. So I'm not really sure whether the NASA guy is on a need to know. He was one of the higher ranking people. There was the
maybe the meeting was he wanted to know, hey, what you said last night about ET, is that true?
Yeah. There was a couple of the people, his chief of staff and his assistant chief of staff were in the room for the screening. They were in a pre-meeting before the NASA meeting the next morning with Reagan. There's no notes as to what happened there, but most of the people who were in the room, there was two astronauts. There was Engel, who was the backup commander for Apollo 10. He didn't go on it. He was also the backup commander for STS-1, the first one, and he was the commander of STS-2, but he's not really a major NASA astronaut that everybody knows. Didn't really, I checked around a little bit, didn't seem to have any interaction with UFOs. And the other guy was Truly, it was the other astronaut. So they aren't major players, major astronauts, whether they'd be read in. There was the one of the major guys from the editorial board at Newsweek was there. There seemed to be quite a few reporters. There was a journalist, this one journalist guy. There was the screenwriter, the guy who co-wrote Apollo 13 was one of the people, William Broyles, something like that. And there was, but other than that, there was the ambassador from Great Britain to the United States was one of the people who was in the room, and that's kind of interesting because Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister at the time, and as you probably know, Margaret Thatcher at one point when asked about UFOs said, you can't tell the people. So her representative to the United States was in the room, and the other interesting thing was that shortly after that, Spielberg went and screened the movie for the Prince Philip and the Queen. E.T. was screened in Great Britain. He went to Great Britain to screen it.
Cool.
So, and then there's a weird story. We can talk a bit more about who was in the room, but there's a weird story that I always thought was significant. Reagan does this E.T. thing. He saw Poltergeist the night before. He was at Camp David. He saw Poltergeist, and the Sunday night he saw E.T., and about 3 months later he ends up in Roswell. And he goes to Roswell. He's with Harrison Schmitt, who was running and actually ended up losing the election. So they go to Roswell, and in front of the hangar where the bodies were supposedly stored, Reagan stands up and he makes an E.T. joke to start the speech. And this is only a couple months after the ET thing, and he actually refers to ET in this joke. And so it's kind of interesting that he sees the ET movie, and then suddenly it's almost like he tells his guys, I need to go to Roswell, because this was just shortly after the famous book by Berlitz and Moore, the first Roswell book, came out.
Right.
So it was pretty hyped up at the time. And Reagan appears at Roswell and makes this speech in front of the hangar. So there's a lot of very interesting stuff.
The people in the room, it kind of may lend to the joke a little more than, like you said, if these people are not people who are read in, but there's a NASA guy, there's a couple astronauts, so of course people get excited hanging out with people like that. So that kind of would make his joke kind of funny because the people who were there. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's a great find, though. It's great to... What's fun, too, about the interview is that you get to hear Spielberg himself and his inflections. And I was really excited that he also called himself a ufologist in that interview.
And the interesting thing here is that he's got, 3 movies coming out now?
Yeah.
That he may face the question again, because I was talking to Billy Cox about it, and he said, well, why after 20 years? For 20 years, he's refused to talk about it in terms of people sending him emails and contacting the publicists and stuff like that. But this is really the first time where he's been faced with the question, where somebody, because the interview didn't really have to do with E.T.,
No.
It had to do with another movie. So he gets sort of blindsided by this question and really didn't expect it to be coming. But he may face that question again because it has got a little bit of media coverage. So he may face the question again while he's doing his publicity stunts for these next movies that are coming out in the next couple of months.
And if it does, it's because, it was on Ain't It Cool News, which is kind of a smaller news site. Of course, we're all posting it all over the place because we're excited about it. But it may happen like other UFO stories where even though our community, and the smaller news site has posted it, once a bigger media source, like Huffington Post, they pick this stuff up, or maybe AOL News picks it up, then it becomes bigger, and they all forget about the original discovery. But still, it's definitely newsworthy, and like you said, it hasn't been out there. What I thought was funny is the interviewer kind of tricked Spielberg because he wanted to talk about Jaws, which was his favorite movie. He got the interview because of Super 8. They were publicizing that. And they have this long, great conversation where it sounds like Spielberg's having a lot of fun talking to this guy about Jaws, and he's getting more open about different things that happened on the set of Jaws that he hadn't shared before. And then at the very end of the interview, this guy slips in the question, and Spielberg surprisingly, I think, was blindsided and answered it. I'm not so sure it was a publicity stunt on his side, rather than just he was having a good time and decided to finally share the experience.
Yeah, because that a lot of times what it comes down to is actually getting the question to him, because Spielberg is the type of guy who has careful control over what he puts out. And I started I know Robbie Graham tried to get to him. A number of people have tried to get to Steven Spielberg, and nobody was able to get past his publicity guy. So he's very guarded, and this was sort of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity where this, I think, as far as I know, it's the first time he's ever actually faced that question.
Yeah. Are you planning on seeing Super 8?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Soon?
I think it has started here already. I think it just started today here.
Okay. So are you going to see it, real soon here?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
The reason why is I just saw it last night, and it was a special Twitter preview. And it's really good, and it is, it definitely plays to Spielberg's interest in this field, and very ET-ish, maybe even a little bit Close Encounter-ish, but it's kind of like an Abrams homage to Spielberg, and it's great because of that. But you have a lot of this fun, without saying too much for the listeners who haven't seen it, but you have this Air Force intrigue, this whole cover-up, and Air Force, taking advantage of the situation, overstepping their bounds in order to keep secrets and stuff like this. So it's a fun movie, especially for people like us interested in the field.
Yeah, and I think that's the way Spielberg tells his stuff, because I don't think we should be naive enough to think that Spielberg doesn't know more than he's letting on, because he has right from, there's an interesting story with Carter, but right from Carter all the way to Obama, he's been very close friends with all of the presidents, and if something is told to him in confidence by the president, he really can't release it, because it sort of shuts the door to him. That,
Right.
He can't, if it's told to him in confidence and stuff like that. And through the movies, he's able to sort of tell the story of what he really thinks is going on. I think he knows a lot more than because even when I pulled the Clinton, the Clintons were both very good friends with both he and his wife. Like Hillary used to jog with Spielberg's wife. And so when I did my Free Information Act request with the Clinton Library, I noticed there was 500-600 pages on Steven Spielberg. So I requested all the material, and about probably better than half of it was withheld. But the president was at Spielberg's house a number of times, actually running his sort of White House from Spielberg's house. So he's very, very close to a lot of people, and you can bet that Ronald Reagan was interested, but Bill Clinton told Roswell producer Paul Davids, he said the word he used, "I'm fascinated in this stuff." So you can bet that Clinton and Spielberg did a lot of talking about UFOs.
Well, that's what's exciting. Is Spielberg obviously is very interested in the subject, very interested in the research. We've got a story in our upcoming magazine where I kind of put some of his earlier quotes and another quote. It's kind of funny because there's this one quote I have in there that you might have heard this interview. It was when the Close Encounters DVD came out. And he says, well, and when I was in my teens, and then I guess in my 20s, well, and in my 30s, I was really interested in UFOs, and I thought there was something to it, which is funny. He says teens, 20s, 30s, but since at that time I think he was in his upper 40s, he didn't mention 40s. Always kind of being sneaky like that, trying not to allude that he's still into this stuff. But he obviously was then, and now has kind of admitted that he's still into it. But he's also, like you said, these presidents, like your research shows, have also been interested in this subject, and he's had a relationship with them. So his conversation with these presidents have to be really interesting. And then I would like to let's get into the first president he had a relationship. And it's funny because this relationship, it was kind of secretive, his relationship with Jimmy Carter.
Yep, and I spent some time when I was at the Carter Library. There's one of the archivists there went to school with Jimmy Carter's son, Chip Carter, and he recalls and he maintains that the sighting that Carter had was probably earlier than 1969, because he said he remembered Chip Carter telling him the story, and he said it was before 1969 because they were still in high school together. So when he and I were there, he was very interested, and he was helping me, and we did a lot of talking about UFOs and stuff like that. And I had asked for this Spielberg file, and it was very strange because what came back was a photocopy of a picture of Spielberg and Jimmy Carter. But what had happened was they had taken the letter that they had sent to Steven Spielberg saying this is the photograph, and they put the envelope over Jimmy Carter's face and the letter over Spielberg's face. You could see who they were, and it was very strange. So and we've tried to track the photograph. We actually tracked the date when the photograph was taken. It wasn't in the catalog, and then the archivist went and did a search for me. And if you were in contact with the president, whether you've written him a letter, talked to him on the phone, or been with him in person, this is all recorded. So you can tell who's been with the president, their interactions. And there was no record at all that Spielberg had ever talked to the president, written the president a letter, or had been in contact with the president. And yet here was this photograph that clearly showed the two of them together. So this is how this weird thing sort of started. And one of the stories was, and it was one of the major papers, whether it was Philadelphia or the Phoenix papers, one of the major U.S. newspapers had stated that Jimmy Carter's favorite movie was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And so when we tracked that at the library, we could track that Jimmy Carter had seen more films than any other president. He'd seen 470 movies. Ronald Reagan, who's always sort of got the reputation as being the the president who's seen the most movies, only had 377 or something.
That's
Carter
a
was
lot of flipping movies.
lot of movies.
I don't watch that many in a year.
And apparently Carter, as the Iranian thing was spiraling down at the end, he watched more and more and more movies. He was almost like he sort of retreated and just watched movies at the end of his presidency.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this weird sort of thing where he was claiming this was his favorite movie, but we couldn't confirm that he'd actually seen the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And
now, why do you think he was so secretive with his relationship with Spielberg?
No idea. We just could confirm that all there was in the Spielberg file was this picture. And the other weird thing, and I don't know if you know this story, the Close Encounters of the Third Kind involves, for people who don't know the plot, there's this pre-organized landing that takes place at a spot, and the Americans are waiting for it, and the thing comes down, and there's this interaction, and there's good aliens instead of bad aliens and stuff like that. And when I was with Bob Emenegger, who had done a documentary for the Nixon administration in the 1970s, dealing with the Holloman Air Force Base landing. And this is a story that he'd been given a film, and they had contact this film, and the film was 3 different cameras of aliens landing at Holloman Air Force Base in, Bob says, 1971. They had the film. They were told at the very end of the documentary they had to give it back. It went back to the Pentagon. And it seems so much the same. So I was talking to Bob about this, and he says, well, I didn't tell you, he said. I forgot to tell you. Alan Sandler gave a copy to Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg asked for a copy of the documentary. So in 1975, after they were finished the documentary, Alan Sandler, the co-producer with Bob Emenegger, gave the documentary to Steven Spielberg. And then 2 years later, Steven Spielberg comes up with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which has this almost exactly the same sort of story about this pre-organized landing. And Emenegger, people don't know, worked with Spielberg's sister, Annie Spielberg. They'd done a bunch of UFO stuff, science fiction UFO movies. And so he tells me last year when I'm with him, he says, once he'd given the film and Steven had done Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Steven Spielberg's mother came to him and said, I've seen your version of the landing and I've seen Steven's version of the landing, and I like Steven's better. It was just
That's
really
funny.
bizarre, So they had this close interaction, but he didn't really have contact with Spielberg, but he did do some UFO material that Steven Spielberg's sister was doing.
And I mean, they say that Spielberg wrote that script very quickly, like over a weekend or something, held up in a room. He wrote the script for Close Encounters, which lends to some conspiracy. Would the Air Force give him the script or something like that? Which I don't know if it sounds very plausible, because of course, also something that you document on your site is how NASA gave Spielberg a lot of hassle over Close Encounters. Yeah, that's the thing about the 20-year, or 20-page letter, Spielberg. And Robbie Graham tracked this back to almost the time period in Australia, some movie magazine in Australia where this actually comes from, where Spielberg said, when NASA writes you a 20-page letter, critical of this, you realize there's something to it. This sort of thing. So and NASA didn't want him to make the movie or to put it out. And of course, the suspicion is that people would get too excited about UFOs. What was the film similar, or what was the film that got people real excited that... Well, it was Jaws. Well, they didn't want another Jaws. They didn't want him to do a Jaws version of Aliens. Because people got afraid of the ocean and sharks because of Jaws. Yeah, so they figured it was going to be the same sort of thing. It was going to be a thing to really frighten people about aliens. Mm-hmm. But then he got the opposite criticism. I can't remember where it came from, but he got the opposite criticism that the aliens were nice guys. I remember it was... Emenegger tells this story as well. When he's at Holloman Air Force Base in the 1980s, under Reagan, he does the documentary in the 1970s, and then he's called back by this General Miller, who was Ronald Reagan's first agent in Hollywood, and he moves his way up, and he becomes the assistant head of DAVA, where they keep all the military film, and there's him and this guy by the name of Scott. And so Miller is this general guy, and he's sort of trying to get this film out that's in there, and he talks about very angry
that Spielberg, that these people are wrecking it, that the aliens aren't good guys. And this is kind of weird. It's happening behind the scenes where, and of course, Emenegger's trying to find out, why are you calling me back? You have the head of DAVA and the assistant head of DAVA, and they're going to give Hynek all this UFO film, and they want to do another documentary. And he says, the government likes what you did the first time, and we'd like to do another documentary. And Emenegger's saying, well, is this Reagan behind this? And he said he just couldn't get a straight answer. He sort of figured that maybe it was Ronald Reagan who wanted a second documentary in the 1980s, and Vallée was involved, and Hynek was involved, but both of them figured it was a setup, that because they weren't going to go ahead with the documentary unless Hynek and Vallée put their names behind the documentary, and they figured the same thing would happen with them. They pull the film, they do all this kind of stuff, and they'd be left holding the bag. So they pulled out, and the documentary was never done.
Interesting. You know what's interesting about that, too, is even though I want to get back to Carter, but the turn in Spielberg. Spielberg has Happy Aliens, you know, all he's got E.T., Close Encounters, everything's hunky-dory, even what was the one with the little robot aliens, Batteries Not Included. But then, you know, comes Taken, the TV miniseries, which is all about abductions. And it's kind of in between, you know. It's more like the aliens are like us. They're not good, they're not bad, they just do their thing. But ever since then, it's certainly all of his alien movies have a dark tone. They're all invaders coming to get us type of thing. Falling Skies coming out with, you know, War of the Worlds. So I wonder if his view has changed. I wonder if they convinced him somehow that, you know, these are bad guys.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the letters, because, I mean, you and I both know that if you're out there and you're doing stuff, you get contacts from people, and you can just imagine the contacts that Spielberg would have gotten from military people and giving him influences. And he doesn't really say very much about anything. You really you just can see what his movies, but you can just imagine what's going on behind the scenes of people contacting him, and he's got very high level contacts with you know, if he's in all the different White Houses.
Well, and what I think, especially from watching Taken, because it was such a long series, but you can tell a lot of research went into it. And he must really spend, because as we know, to research this stuff, we spend a lot of time of our lives researching. He must sometimes lock himself into a room and just read. He must study this stuff a lot. I mean, he must really, really spend a lot of time on it, I think.
Yeah, and he seems to have a fairly good grasp of what's going on. I mean, he's not sort of out on the edge. He seems to be hitting the high points. He knows what's important and what the arguments are inside the UFO community. And even when you take the government conspiracy, he always has the government conspiracy behind the thing, which would sort of indicate that he's believed that all along, that there is this sort of element of the government that's trying to, you know, capture the alien and keep it quiet and, you know, this kind of stuff, which is kind of interesting.
And it makes sense. I mean, that's what would happen and what probably is happening. Now, back to the Carter and Close Encounter years, I guess one question I would ask is, you said that his movie is like Holloman, which I agree. But a lot of people these days, you know, there's a story of Serpo. And there's a question, the chicken or the egg. I really have the feeling that these Serpo documents are not real, and they've been mirrored Close Encounters, because the story in the Serpo documents is just like Close Encounters. A lot of people out there think, no, Spielberg must have known about Serpo. What are your feelings on that?
Well, I think Serpo is just the material that they're, and the strange thing was, Serpo I really didn't follow. Because when I first came out, you know, it was kind of goofy, and then they had the Ronald Reagan, the supposed Casey briefing of Ronald Reagan. It was just like totally out there. It was just like totally stupid. So I just sort of ignored it. I just didn't pay any attention to Serpo. And I know I was at the Congress one time. I was lecturing at Congress, and one of the people came up to me after and sort of claims to be an insider and said, well, why didn't you mention the Reagan briefing?
I know exactly who that is, too.
Yeah, and I said, well, because it's not real. It's garbage. And he said, well, how do you know it's, and I said, well, it's disinformation. He said, no, it's only 10% disinformation. And I said, well, what 10% is disinformation? The strange thing about Serpo is if you listen to guys, and the strange thing was I heard that Hal Puthoff was sort of following at the beginning, and then he sort of fell out. But if you listen to Kit Green, who used to run the Weird Desk, if you see the interview he did with these guys from England who came and did this, the book, what's it called, The Mirage Men? If you read the interview they do with him, he basically says, well, don't throw it all out. And it's sort of this whole idea that you're weaving this story that he's sort of saying, you know, it's not totally garbage, that they're feeding material in there. And that's what I think is all the documents. Like I would say my basic stance now is every document that's been released is phony. MJ, all of them are phony, but they all mean something. And the whole idea is when Bill Moore was first contacted, he's the one that started this thing. And Bill Moore, I knew him fairly well. You can say all the things about his arrogance and all this sort of stuff. But Bill Moore was a straight shooter type guy. He was trying to get to the bottom of the thing. And he was told, we're going to try to give you the answer to what's going on and try to give you something, but without breaking the law. If you release classified material, you're breaking the law. So that's what I think they've done, is they've taken real documents, they've sort of changed them around, whatever. Nobody knows what's going on. Everybody's off balance. So they got you off balance, so they continue the cover-up. And yet the idea that there was, like, for example, the live alien. This story has been repeated. There's piles of examples of, like Bob Emenegger, for example. There's all these people who were offered interviews of the live alien. And Bob said to me, he says, well, this is garbage. And that's in Serpo, and it's in a lot of other documents about this live alien. And I said to him, I said, well, who told you the story? And he said, Paul Shartle, who was the security manager at Norton. And I said, well, was Paul Shartle a phony guy? Because he always talked about Richard Doty. I said, well, is he like Richard Doty, or is he a legitimate guy? He said, no, he was a legitimate guy. And I said, well, he's the guy there who gave you the offer of the live alien, which fell apart. So, and then he went, yeah, you're right. So this is the thing, that there's this stuff that they want you to get the idea there's a live alien. They want you to get an idea there's MJ-12. But you can't release the cover-up, because once you spill the milk, you can't control it.
Yeah,
but
I've got Mirage Men on my desk right here, funny enough. And for the listeners...
And that's the thing with Kit Green. Like, Kit Green is not a type of guy like Richard Doty or all these people who have been, you know, sort of been made out to be like a wacko who's telling a bunch of stories. Kit Green is like a straight shooter. If you give him a question, he'll answer it straight. And when I saw him say, you know, don't throw out Serpo, that there's stuff in there, and I'm going, whoa, this is...
That's the hard part, though, that you, like you said, I don't agree with, and I know exactly who talked to you, because he's told me that before about the Reagan document, that most likely, though, 90% of it's not real as opposed to the 10.
Yeah.
And recently I interviewed, for the listeners who aren't aware of Bill Moore and Richard Doty and some of what we're talking about, we get into detail on this with Greg Bishop in a recent interview, because he's got all the detail about how this all started. And one of the things that was documented, for example, as an example of this sort of thing, was that there was a gentleman on an Air Force base, and this was one of the first documents that Bill Moore got. Luckily, he researched it because he was a good researcher, and he got it from Doty, a first piece of disinformation he could confirm. There was the Air Force sighting. This guy saw a UFO, reported it. That was the story. Well, Doty took it and changed it to be, I can't remember the details, but, you know, this thing flying around, I think landing, right, and aliens coming out or something. Luckily, Moore looked into it, and Doty had completely blown it out and totally added all of these lies and everything to make it seem as though it was something that it wasn't. And there's an example, taking a real event and only keeping a sliver of the truth so that there really was a UFO sighting by this guy, but then changing the rest of the document to being a complete BS.
And so if you're a researcher and you go for it, like they set up Bill Moore because he wrote the first Roswell book, that's when he was contacted. 10 days before the book went public, he was contacted by this Falcon guy. And Linda Howe tells the story that she was contacted by Richard Doty when she put out the Strange Harvest, the whole story about the cattle mutilations in Denver. When she was working in Denver, she was contacted, and they said, well, we don't like the documentary you put out, and they tried to set her up. So they're getting material, but they're also burning these people. What I've maintained lately is people will think, well, it's just Bill Moore and it's just Richard Doty. Absolutely is not. If you take a look at the real story, you'll see the Woods, Robert and Ryan Wood. There's over 4,000 pages of these documents that have been leaked.
Yeah.
4,000 pages is not Richard Doty or Bill Moore. This
Yeah.
is an organization, and I say we've got to figure out why would you release 4,000 documents. That's a lot of work. And
Yeah.
we're a small UFO community. We really don't
Yeah.
influence anybody. There's got to be a reason why
Well,
they're feeding this material into us.
the other is Serpo, because that's an example. Kit Green says, don't throw it all out. But what? Like you said, I mean, Serpo is tons and tons of pages. When it was coming out, because I tried to my best, and at that time I was able to, I was reading everything that was coming out. I mean, and a lot of it was completely ridiculous. Things that you know for a fact are inaccurate. But let's say a part of it is. Well, when you're talking, for example, 4,000 pages, and it's a needle in a haystack by figuring out which of the couple hundred might be real.
Exactly. For a researcher, there's really not much you can really get out of it, except for like consistencies where this, like the live alien keeps popping every couple of years, where there's another live alien story, and some of the stuff, like I don't know if you're familiar with the Ronald Pandolfi, I would say is the key guy. Ronald Pandolfi knows how all the pieces go together, and he is with the National Intelligence Office right now that briefs the president, and he was the top scientist in the CIA. He ran the Weird Desk for the UFO material, and when there was a bunch of documents that got leaked, and Gary Beckham put these things out, and these were documents where he was going after Richard Doty for the Serpo stuff. But what he was going after him was that he had released classified material, and some of it had to do with some names of some guys inside the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I was warned about Pandolfi as well, about different documents to watch what you do, because he's the guy that guards classified material. If anything classified comes out, he's going to jump all over it. And these documents floated around where he was contacting Doty and saying, I'm going to call you up on this, that you're releasing classified material. And again, there's sort of some indication. So Pandolfi knew what was real in the Serpo stuff and what was classified, and he was accusing Richard Doty of being behind the whole Serpo thing. So, but for an ordinary researcher to read that stuff and then to sort of say that this is truth, there's nothing. They just want everything off, completely off, everybody be off balance, and yet this story of what has happened is sort of coming out, which is maybe what they need. They can't have you back in 1947 where you have no idea of what's going on, or where that there's been crashes and there's been autopsies and there's a group running it and all this sort of stuff, because I don't think they're in any position at all to make any sort of disclosure, because they really don't know how to control it once they make the disclosure.
Well, it's like the recent Area 51 book with Annie Jacobs, and some people are speculating that perhaps that old man really saw the debris from Roswell and the creatures from Roswell, and in order to throw him off, or he heard rumors about it, and in order to throw him off, they told him, oh, no, that was, a Russian, the Russians and the Germans trying to trick us. And so that was the cover story they gave to this guy, which is a complete possibility. And, of course, he buys it. He believes it. He puts that out there. Now, 60-some-odd years later, it's big news. And then Jacobs is now getting burned over it because of the ridiculous cover story. But that's the possibility of how some of this stuff gets out and how it gets covered up.
Yep. Yeah, and it gets out there and it sort of sticks. Like all these Roadrunner guys are now upset now that instead of a book telling the great story of what they did that they can share with their friends and family, it's all become, and you see the interviews, nobody wants to talk about the A-12 and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Everybody goes to the last 8 pages of the book, and everybody wants to know about the aliens at Area 51, and this stuff sort of sticks. And one of the examples that shows how it sticks is one of the things I was looking at with the Clinton library was the alien invasion movie of 1996, Independence Day. And this is the story where the president is taken to Area 51 and shown that there is something at Area 51. They've got the craft and all this sort of stuff, and they fight off the aliens and win and stuff like this. And Bill Clinton stated in 2005 that a lot of people in his administration actually believed that. And I think that's what came from Independence Day, that there were so many people in his administration that believed that there was an alien ship and aliens at Area 51, that he actually sent somebody to Area 51 to find out about it. And then, of course, they told him, well, no, there's nothing here. It's just advanced aircraft and stuff like that. But if you get high-ranking officials and a number of people in a White House who actually believe the story that comes out of an Independence Day movie, then you got to see that this stuff is affecting everybody, even the high-ranking people.
So getting back to wrap up the Carter thing, so you would agree that Holloman most likely was the genesis of Close Encounters, or a lot of the as opposed to Serpo. But one thing I wanted to touch on, because it's something on your site that's pretty important, I think that people throw out all the time, and I think, it's unfortunate people don't do the heavy research stuff like you do. They throw out all the time that Carter was asked Bush to be briefed when Bush was CIA director, and Carter, before he got into presidency but was elected president-elect, he wanted to know about ETs, and he asked George Bush about it, who was the director of CIA, and George Bush said, no, you can't know about it. But later that briefing of some sort was put together for Carter. And your site documents, and I think it's the only place it documents, how it's really kind of a legitimate source that this comes from. It comes from Sheehan, who
Annie Sheehan.
Who was a lawyer who was tasked by Marcia Smith, is that her name, who worked for the Science Board for the White House to look into this stuff.
Yeah, and Danny Sheehan is and you know him, I know him. I mean, the last thing you'd ever think that Danny Sheehan would lie. Now, I wrote a letter to Marcia Smith, an email, and I heard from Leslie Kane that Danny Sheehan was pretty upset about it. But basically, the way I wrote it was, I said, well, is Danny Sheehan lying? Is he telling the truth? Did this actually happen? She didn't answer the email, but then I heard this back channel thing that Danny Sheehan had heard about me writing this email. Marcia Smith has never been interviewed by anybody, and the story they told, this is a story that comes up. There is a kernel of truth to this, because the original story was that Carter, when he was president-elect, he gets briefed by the CIA director from the administration before, which would have been Bush under Gerald Ford. And he asked for the files, and Bush tells him, you can't have the files. Curiosity on the part of the president is not sufficient need to know. Now, lately, just in the last month or two, Shirley MacLaine has come out, done the interview with Coast to Coast, and she talks about talking to Carter, and she's talking to him about UFOs, and she said that Carter told her that he went to his intelligence officials and asked for the UFO material, and that his intelligence officials said, you don't have a need to know, you're only around here for 4 years. So she's sort of backing up this story that the president doesn't have a need to know. And the other one that fits into this is the whole story that I put out and that doesn't seem to get any reaction, is this Ronald Pandolfi guy. And Ronald Pandolfi, when Bill Clinton wanted the UFO information, his science advisor had asked for a briefing from the CIA on UFOs, and the job was given to Ronald Pandolfi, who at the time was the White House liaison. And he gives it to Maccabee instead of the CIA doing, because you can't have the CIA doing, because the CIA isn't involved with UFOs, so they get Maccabee to do the briefing. Now, I've been in contact with Dan Smith, who gets a lot of stuff from Pandolfi. A lot of people really question Dan Smith. I think he's telling exactly what Pandolfi's telling him. And he asked for Pandolfi about a briefing for George Bush Jr. And according to his website, Pandolfi told him the president cannot be players. We tell them what they need to know and hope we don't have to put them down. So there's this kernel of truth that runs through that the president is told curiosity on the part of the president is not sufficient need to know. Now, Jimmy Carter has denied the story that he asked. He's been interviewed lately, denied the story that he asked Bush for the records. But Jimmy Carter has bounced back and forth. He's even to the point now where he's saying he doesn't believe that Martians can come here from another planet. And he believes that his sighting may have had to do with some military experiments going on at an Air Force base near where he had the sighting. So Jimmy Carter is sort of, I don't know, he's a strange sort of...
Backtracked, yeah.
Fellow. He's bouncing all over the place. When he was asked by James Fox, he had a fairly interesting, because there he was caught off guard. James Fox had his father in a wheelchair. They were going through this book signing, and that's when he asked them the question, what did you do when you were in the White House? You said you were going to release the UFO stuff. What did you do? And that's when he said, there are many questions, but no one has answers, which seemed to indicate that he tried to get it, he couldn't get it, and he just sort of gave up. And yet, when you look back, you see the vast majority of the documents that have been released were released under the Carter administration. So he did do a lot of stuff, and I've been sort of documenting a number of actual studies that were done. The people now, there's probably 5 or 6 studies, UFO studies, that started out, were killed in the early stages, but there does appear to be a lot of effort that Carter actually did try to get to the bottom of it.
It looks like, and moving from Carter, we talked Reagan, so we'll skip up to Clinton, but it looks like there's a trend, though, with presidents that they, like the public, think that the president has a lot more power than they actually have. And I think it sounds like Carter, when he became president, found out that there's a limit to his power. Reagan might have known that. He was just an actor, and he would never have all the info. But and I don't know that he wanted to. He was more of a organizer. But Clinton, of course, as we know, tried to pursue this, and he wasn't given much information. And he even says they could be keeping information from me. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they were. And I think even Obama's run into this especially with the oil spills, that he doesn't have as much power as he thinks. He can be bullied around by big money, just like or military, or just like anybody else.
Yeah, because basically what happens is once you become the president, if they do tell you, I mean, if they sit you down and say there's a top secret briefing, and here it is, I mean, you're sworn to secrecy. There's not much you can do, because Obama was a big guy. No more secrets, no more of this, that, lies, and we're going to be transparent and all this sort of stuff. And he signs this sort of executive order when he first comes in on freedom of information, and it all looks great. And then when you hear him talk to the CIA after they get bin Laden, he says, and I was trying to get the audio from this, where he says, and in this time we kept a secret, and that's good, which is completely the opposite of what he started out as. And basically, because it becomes your CIA, it becomes your cover-up, and what are you going to do? You're sort of stuck in a situation where everybody basically, no matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican, just keeps going along, that the system is way bigger than the person in the office, and you just sort of try to guide it, but it runs itself.
One big link between the Carter administration and what we were talking about with Sheehan and Marcia Smith and Clinton, which I found interesting, was that Marcia Smith worked for Jack Gibbons. And Jack Gibbons is then the guy who was getting the information from Lawrence Rockefeller when Lawrence Rockefeller was trying to get Clinton to open up the UFO question. And Gibbons played like he didn't know anything about UFOs, yet he had to be privy to these reports from Marcia Smith, which the public still hasn't seen, and which Sheehan says admits that there are UFOs and different types of extraterrestrial races visiting us.
Yeah, that was something I was never really able to track. I talked to Danny about what was on the page. Was it, classified, this sort of stuff. Those two reports, the one said that there were between 2 and 6 ET races, and then the UFO one, these two different studies, we were never able to really track these sort of things. And Gibbons had the problem of he may have known stuff back then, but when he was in the Clinton administration, you could tell that he really wasn't getting anywhere. Their wheels were spinning. They were not able to.
Didn't seem like Gibbons wanted to.
Yeah. And even Clinton himself, like the whole story about Clinton, he tries to get the material, and then he can't get it, so he goes to Webster Hubbell, and this is a confirmed story. Webster Hubbell was Assistant Secretary in Justice. What does he know about UFOs? He knows nothing. So why would they put him in charge of a UFO study? Because he was friends, he was a law partner with Hillary Clinton at the LaRose law firm. They could trust the guy. And he sends him out to investigate, are there UFOs? And second thing, who killed JFK? Yeah. So Clinton was a conspiratorial guy. He didn't believe that who killed JFK. He believed that was all a conspiracy too. And so when I filed Free Information Act request, and this hasn't been released yet, I said I want all the files in the Clinton administration on the JFK assassination, and the preliminary report was just 2,500 pages of material. So here was a guy who couldn't get material, and then you get these other stories like Hillary being involved. There's 2 documents that showed that Hillary was directly involved with with the Rockefeller Initiative. And then I get two people, and one was William LaParle, who was a researcher who was friends with Pandolfi and that whole group in Maine. He tells me the story that Hillary, indirectly through a second person, came to him looking for information. And then Daryl Sims tells me, I hear a story that Daryl Sims got contact. I phone him up and says, is this true? Did Hillary come to you for information? She said, yeah, there was a woman that came to one of my meetings, said she was a friend of Hillary's, and that she wanted all my audio tapes on abduction and all this kind of stuff, and that he gave her the material, and she went back and came back about a month later and said the president and Hillary really enjoyed your material.
Wow.
So the Clinton was not able to get anything through normal channels, so they called in Stephen Greer to talk to the CIA director. They're calling all these people in, trying to get material from the UFO community because they can't get it through normal channels.
Yeah.
And it just sort of shows that the president may not be playing with all the cards. He may know part. It may be a sort of a thing to protect the president. You really don't want to know about this, Mr. President, because if they ask you a question, then you're going to have to answer.
Right.
That's the big $64 question. But I think there are people who control it. I don't think it's really the president. I think it's, in fact, John Alexander, who talked about this Reagan rumor about the ET, what was said there. John Alexander says, well, it was just rumor. That's how he discounts it. Well, now it's not rumor anymore. And if you go to John Alexander's site and you take a look at the pictures, and I'm pretty sure he just put these on there. He has a picture of him and Ronald Pandolfi together, and he describes Ronald Pandolfi. He says, those who should know do. That's the whole point. Ronald Pandolfi is one of the guys who should know, and he does know what's going on, and he knows if there's some truth to it.
Right.
Ronald Pandolfi knows who's got the need to know, who's read in and who's not read in. That's the guy who has all the answers, not so much the president.
I wanted to ask if you knew how Spielberg then became friends with Clinton.
How they became friends?
Yeah, how the Spielbergs became friends with the Clintons.
I didn't see anything in the documents. I've got a couple hundred pages of documents. It really didn't. I know Spielberg gave them this famous. There's a famous picture in the Oval Office of the Statue of Liberty that was a famous big-time money picture that hung in his office. So he was giving money, and it may have been just because there was a lot of movies he was putting out, and every time there's a movie, the president gets it before it even goes into the movie theater, and then the people will come in, and Spielberg slept in the Lincoln bedroom and, went through the whole thing.
Any sort of link you found where they actually, because there's lots of connections. In fact, in our next magazine, we used one of the pictures you provided us from the Clinton Library of Spielberg with Hillary, and then we have
the
another
problem
one.
with it is that people talk about openness. I would say that it's way worse. I mean, from the days of Reagan, the stuff that they would withhold at libraries. I mean, the Spielberg stuff, there's really nothing. There was nothing. I mean, I've got a couple hundred pages, but nothing I would put on my website. There's really nothing
from
there.
The Clinton
From
Library?
the Clinton. There's hundreds of pages that have been withheld on Clinton and Spielberg. So you really can't tell whether that's the stuff you're really looking for. It probably is the stuff that you're looking for. There's really nothing that you can really get out anymore. And the prime example of that is John Podesta, where I tried to get the pictures from his 50th birthday and one videotape. And I went through all the appeals. I fought it. And absolutely nothing. They are withholding all of it. Can't have it. And the basic reason
for the listeners who aren't aware, Pandolfi had an X-Files birthday party at the White House because he's into UFOs and X-Files and everything.
Yeah.
And for some reason, that stuff's being withheld.
It has been withheld, and they have it goes from the library, it goes to Clinton and Bruce Lindsay, who's his lawyer, so they review it, and they are the ones that turned it down, and they turned it down, then I made the appeal, they turned down the appeal, and unless I go to court, I mean, it's not going anywhere, but if they're going to withhold somebody's pictures from his 50th birthday because it's embarrassing to the president, anything that's of any significance is being withheld. It's just unbelievable the stuff they're withholding now, and for crazy reasons, and unless you've got a lot of money or you're a powerful law firm in Washington, it's almost impossible to get this material. You can file all these FOIs. I have probably now another 1,000 pages to review it reviewed or released at the Clinton Library. But a lot of this stuff, you go there and you sit there after a day and go like, why did I come all the way down here? This is a total waste of time. It's just the good stuff is years away from being released. And this is a guy like Clinton who's supposed to be open, or Obama. You figure Obama was open. You can expect guys like Bush and Nixon and people like this to withhold stuff, but these guys who are claiming to be open, and then you go and really you can't get anything. As I said to Spielberg, there was, I can't remember, it was 500-600 pages of material, and there was nothing there worth reading. I've got it all on my scanned it all, but there's really nothing there worth reading.
And then you said Spielberg has a relationship somewhat with the Obamas.
Yeah, there's a picture. If you go if you Google search White House Theater, there's a interesting article there which has a lot of photographs from the White House Theater, and you'll see one there where Tom Hanks and Spielberg previewed their film with Obama in the.
I'm a big fan of the White House photographer. He takes some incredible pictures, and they are very open with those pictures. That's great.
Yeah. So and now I'm trying to figure out. And one of the guy that was at the Carter Library said it was actually, it would be a very interesting project to try to track all the movies that the presidents have watched, because you can get a list of them. But the thing is, you got to go to all the libraries and do all the listings. So that may be something that I may do now if I go to different libraries, is try to follow all the movies to see how many presidents watched UFO movies, or if there's any comments and stuff like that. Because we've done it for a couple of presidents, but nobody's ever gone in and checked to see what kind of movies the president watches.
Yeah. Now I guess we're running out of time, so getting back to the current news and this list that you were able to get, was there anybody else of note at the ET movie that you can think of that now that you've seen this list?
There was Sandra Day O'Connor was there from the Supreme Court, which was kind of a weird one.
But I think she was just brand new. She was just got onto the Supreme Court at this time. Yeah,
there was there was really nobody. I'm pretty sure I've been told by the archivist that Bush and George Shultz had been in the meeting. I heard that somewhere, but nobody of that rank, not the vice president wasn't there. The chief of staff and the assistant chief of staff were there. And other than that, there was no government high-ranking officials. The NASA guy you mentioned, Vernon Walters, who was, an ambassador, a couple of ambassadors. Because it was, and I may do some more research. I may come up with something, but to me, it was interesting that ET was there, and they have to do an invite list. So who do you invite to the ET movie?
Yeah.
And there has to be something pop up as to who they are. What people got to remember is that half of them were like the husband or the wife of the key person. So half of the people you can eliminate immediately because they're just there with their spouse, who is the person you're actually looking for. So Buckley, a lot of conservative, James Buckley, a lot of guys from different conservative magazines, Newsweek, film writers, stuff like that. But nobody that I could find that really you'd say, man, that's interesting, that guy's in the room. He knew what was going on. I really couldn't think of anybody on that list who really had a true need to know that I would say, that guy's in the loop. None of them rang a bell. That's where I went back to this statement that maybe Chandray was right when he said that Reagan had said, I bet you there aren't 6 people in this room know what's going on here. This is true.
It was exciting. It was an exciting week because, last week I hadn't been aware, and it was from the Silver Screen Saucers website that I became aware that, Spielberg, his first E.T. movie was done when he was a high schooler, and he did it right here. He aired it here in Phoenix. So I went to that theater, took some pictures, stuff like that. So that was really exciting for me already, getting excited for Super 8. And then this news came out, which is really exciting as well. So, and then it topped it off. I get to see the Super 8 movie, which is great. So it's been a spectacular Spielberg adventure. And this is just a cherry on top, getting to talk to the presidential authority on UFOs, Grant Cameron. So this has been a great week, and thank you so much for doing the interview.
Okay, and I appreciate your interest, and hopefully we come up with something new down the road that even gets it a little bit deeper as to what's going on.
Yep, and Silver Screen Saucers, by the way, you've written something recently up there?
Yeah, I did the alien invasion thing, and that's kind of something maybe people don't know about Reagan's obsession with the movie The Earth Stood Still and how it may have ended the Cold War, and definitely had to do with his statements about the alien invasion. That all came from his obsession with that movie, which was in the 1950s.
And, of course, Presidential UFO, where you're always posting new and great stuff.
Yep.
All right, great. Thanks for joining us.
And thanks for giving me the lead on the story. You're the one that broke it.
Yep, my pleasure. I knew you would be excited about it.
Oh, I was excited. You betcha. Thank you, sir.
You betcha. So one thing I discovered first, we do have the list of the people that were at the ET movie, and it's on our website. It's the top story today, feature story, Reagan's Extra-Terrestrial Movie Screening Guest List. So you can go to our website and you can look at the list, and what I've done here is actually written a story with details about some of the more interesting people that were there. And someone that we didn't mention or get into too much, Grant mentioned him, but not a whole lot about his background, which is actually pretty interesting, is Vernon Walters. He was a diplomat. He was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations from 85 to 89. During the time of ET, he was kind of like this on-call diplomat. But more interesting is actually from 72 to 76, he was the deputy director of the CIA. Possibly someone in the know. Supposedly Bush. We talked about Sheehan and Bush and Sheehan supposedly finding out that Bush was in the know and denied access to information to Carter. So interesting stuff. You can also get more about what Spielberg had said and even listen to the audio and hear Spielberg talking himself. It's a lot of fun because he was real excited about it. Coming up next time, well, we're going to have Professor Ted Loder. He was a professor of Earth Sciences at the University of New Hampshire. He's going to be speaking at MUFON this year in July. His main topic is ET tech and free energy that the ETs have discovered. Free energy. So he's going to be talking about that, and we're going to have him on. He's a real busy guy. If for some reason we can't get him, we'll probably bring on Steve Volk, who I'm real excited to talk about. He just wrote a book called Fringeology, and essentially he's a journalist who was trying to write a book to write off, paranormal experiences because he thought he had a ghost sighting and the whole paranormal. He assumed, like everybody does, that it's a bunch of hogwash, but he found out he couldn't. He was surprised at how much evidence there is to various types of paranormal phenomena and that he wasn't able to completely just shove it off as a bunch of goofiness. So I'm excited to talk to Steve Volk in the next couple of weeks. We'll get him on if we can't get Ted Loder. Both exciting interviews to look forward to. We're out of time. Thank you for listening to Open Minds Radio. Don't forget to visit openminds.tv for more UFO news. We will talk to you next week, people.